Hello, everybody. My name is Nazar Bina. I am your host here on the Omnichannel X podcast. I'm very excited about this episode. I have with me today Martin Vernal and Louise Harder Fischer. Louise is an associate professor at the IT University in Copenhagen, and Martin is head of communications in the City of Copenhagen, and also a external lecturer at the IT University of Copenhagen. We have been chatting on and off for a little over a year now. And so we're going to talk today about some methods that Martin and Louise have been collaborating on and how they might be applied when looking at our artificial intelligence projects to, well, I'll let you two summarize the goals. Louise, do you want to introduce yourself first? A little.
Yeah, so just as you said, I'm an associate professor at IT University in Copenhagen. And being an associate professor, you also do a lot of research. So you immerse yourself into practice. And during the last 2 to 3 years, my main research question has been, how do you make work meaningful for people in the AI era? And then I've been working with Martin and Martin's department, collaborating around an action-oriented method to actually meet that goal of creating meaningful work in the AI era. So
Fantastic.
that is pretty much what I'm doing.
Great. And Martin?
So I'm head of a communication department where I think we're around 20, 25 people, and it's in one of the administrations in the city of Copenhagen. And also I'm working with AI integration now since early 2023, actually, when short time after ChatGPT went live. We embarked on a learning program in my administration, and during this process we met with IT University and Louise because we kind of were looking for a new methodology because it was obvious to us. We can get back into that. It was obvious to us that we needed something else in terms of how to work and introduce this new kind of technology. So this has been the main focus. And as Louisa said, focus on the meaningfulness, the kind of value that we produce, and how do we maintain this, and how do we use this to guide how and why we use AI.
So what is this method called and why did you create it? Louise, do you want to?
The method is called STAIR, which is an acronym of STAIR, which stands for sociotechnical AI reflection. Being a researcher that brings with me the sociotechnical perspective into how I understand phenomena in organizations and the changing nature of work with ICT, then the sociotechnical mindset approaches is very important to how I do research, but also how I see the world. So that's the first ST in that method. And then Martin can elaborate on the AIR element.
So we could talk about the social technical methodology could really be applied to any sort of technological phenomena, any kind of digitization process. In this context, it's AI we're talking about, and I do think that there's a lot of it about AI and specifically generative AI that is different in many ways from earlier, technologies. So the AI is obviously to emphasize that part, and reflection I think is a very well chosen word, I would say, because that's the kind of the meat of the matter. That's the actual content of the method. That's what do we do. That's what we practice, and that's what we put into a structured framework.
It's a structured reflection.
We call it structured reflection, actually. Yeah.
Fantastic. Oh, well, great.
Yeah.
So,
To say that there is a methodology here, and there are kind of polls we set around this to say we have to stay within this framework. So it's open-ended. We invite the open-endedness, the reflection, but it's structured around a set of principles and insights from the research and our practical learning program.
I think it's fantastic because I think a lot of our listeners will be wondering how do they, within their own job roles, and how do, if they're team leaders or managers, how do they maintain meaningful work for their staff? So how do we stop ourselves from simply being kind of meat puppets, we're there to review some AI output and make sure that the machines keep humming. I'm very interested in process reimagination in this age. There's an instinct I'm seeing from my clients and customers that just say, like, can't the AI just do it? Why do we need to do all this thinking now that we've invented a thinking machine? Which bothers me a lot because I think that the classic approach to technology introduction is often, who can I fire?
Mm-hmm.
Companies often choose to do the same cheaper rather than think about how they could do better.
Right.
I use the phrase value, not volume,
Mm-hmm.
a lot. My listeners might be getting sick of it,
Right.
but
Well, you're only adding to the fire here, so.
yeah. But I feel like what you're talking about, it provides a bit more method to say, okay, well, I do want to create value, or I do want to maintain meaningful work for my team. Even if management says I have to cut half the headcount, somebody's going to be left. So
Yeah.
how do we build a process? So what are the components of this methodology? So what does this structure look like?
I would say first that it's very important that the method builds on a couple of theoretical perspectives,
Oh, right.
which
Okay.
are a combination of the area work design, that you need, how do you say, organizational designers that know something about a lot of work characteristics. What is job identity? What are the outcomes of redesigning work and work processes? And that's typically, how do you say, psychological or psychologists, workplace psychologists, or people hired in, the HR department, or people who understands what work design is. And then it also builds on an element called job crafting, which is another layer of understanding how work design evolves, but in the hands of the individual. So, job crafting is how individual people redesign their work so it fits them and their preferences better in order to be more productive, but also reach elements of well being and being connected not only to your job, but also your role. So there's this work design, which I know Martin would like to describe as top down, while bottom up is job crafting. And both these elements or theories comes from a sociotechnical perspective, where you rely on actually practice. You need to practice a sociotechnical mindset. And that's about not just understanding the technology, but have a sensitivity around how do you design the organizational system around the technology. And that can only be done through practice. So these are the theoretical pillars that this method builds upon. And then in the hands of Martin and his department, another very practical perspective was more like an agile method. So you could also say 3 pillars of theories and a mindset, and then in a more practical approach, building more agile methods. And now Martin can put on
Right, sure.
some of the very concrete steps that we take.
Sure. Yeah, so that's exactly right. We did obviously look at the Scrum, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners are also aware with the Scrum methodology, and it's the terminology also and within Agile and the methodology within that. So what we were looking for was a method we could put these things into practice. So that I guess you could say there are two like macro steps of STAIR. The first being actually just defining your principles. So what you work around is a set of principles that guide this structured reflection. And these principles can be framed as questions, as points you want to observe, a kind of reflection prompts that you want to guide your conversation around AI. We can get back to how we actually practice this reflection. But the first step would be to identify what are your principles. And this is a process.
Give me an example of a principle.
So a principle is when we use generative AI in our work or workflows, we want to maintain value in work. So that's a common principle. You know this from any kind of organizational implementation or scoping.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a principle, we want to reflect on what kind of value does this produce. And each principle has a set of, you could say, sub-questions and points of interest that you want to dig into if you're what we call a STAIR master. Again, borrowing terminology here from...
I'm going to ask a simple question with a complex answer. What's value?
Exactly. That's actually the question we would ask as a STAIR master. It's what kind of value does this produce? Is it in terms of economics, in terms of efficiency, in terms of quality?
Professionalism, does it enhance your professional identity?
Mm.
So there's a lot of ways that you could talk about this. We don't use these principles where there's a predefined set of rules. It's open reflection, and we just want to guide people to be aware about what kind of value proposition do we have here. And we can get back to examples where we've actually shifted a value proposition during these conversations. Other examples and principles could be do we have frameworks and guidelines in place that guide us in terms of compliance, in terms of feeling secure, in terms of quality? We talk about experimentation and learning, but you can structure this interview as you want. But I just want to say that in our set of principles, we have 8 principles. But again, I think the first step here would be define your own principles. And as Louise would say, there's insights from the sociotechnical theory that would more or less inform some of your principles. It's just not random principles. But again, you would have your own specific context, your own specific culture and language that you want to see represented in these principles. So that's step number one.
Let's go through them. Yeah, let's go through what the framework as it is, and then maybe we can circle back on how it can be adapted or applied. So what are the fundamentals that are there? You said you had 8 principles already that people...
Yeah. So let's say we've defined our principles, and I would say there are 3 fundamentals. There's the principles themselves. Then there's, you could say, the participatory aspect, which is we have sessions guided, facilitated by a STAIR master, which is just
Scrum Master?
It's a STAIR master. It's just a word for the person who knows these principles by heart and the perspective that are within these principles, who can guide and facilitate the conversation. And then we have a set of tools, just really practical tools we use. And this could be like call it a STAIR board, right? But it's just a Microsoft list where we, in our case at least, we register the conversations and the insights and whatever we feel like circling back to at a later point. And we facilitate conversations by using these boards and visualizations. But it's super simple, really. It's based around these sessions, these conversations. And they can be they can be formed as conversations or as workshops more online, like as you know from Agile. So these are the basic principles, the basic elements, the principles, participation, and the tools that you facilitate.
Okay. And then, so what happens in one of these sessions?
So depending on the scope of the use case, so let's say it's a larger use case, we would prepare first, the STAIR master would prepare. There's a brief. In some cases, there would be a brief, or otherwise we would make a brief first, describing what's the use case and what's the intention of this use case. We would prepare and we would reflect, in advance on which of these principles do we see maybe more highlighted here or being in play in some sense. And we would facilitate this discussion as a workshop. So reviewing basically the persons, asking them to reflect on these principles. And the trick here is being a facilitator and not putting people on the spot as an exam, but having them reflect openly on what's the value proposition, what kind of value propositions do we have, and do we have access to learning, and does this change anything in our social relationships with our colleagues within our own group or within our organizations, and just get into these kind of open-ended discussions. And the STAIR master's job is to ensure that we keep within the field of the sociotechnical field.
So imagine that I'm a leader and I've got a team and I'm trying to implement this. Where do I start? So I'm trying to learn the method and how do I apply it? Where do I begin?
I would say you begin by gathering people and telling them, well, today we're going to use, let's say, 1 hour to talk about and reflect upon the impact from AI in our work, but also the outcomes that this department or team is obliged to deliver in the organization. So you tie it to the strategy also, and then you start out with, okay, let's discuss one use case, an AI model that is changing how we report or document or any sort of task. And then first we ask ourselves out in the open, what is the value that is added to our workflow, our present workflow? And then you talk about value.
Say value. What could be added by the new AI process?
Yes. How is work changing, and is it improving? Are we being better at assessing quality?
Mm-hmm.
Or is the quality in the output actually, increasing? Or is it decreasing? Just talking about value in a more generic way gives people, an opportunity to weigh in on what is value. And because it's in a sociotechnical perspective, value is also humanistic objectives and economic objectives. So this is something that you are allowed to speak about, or you are given a space to speak about what is the value. that we in this team actually see or experience or sense that we get out of this new tool or technology or whatever. And then quite fast we move into, because this is a session that can take, let's say, 30 minutes or an hour. So quite fast we move into asking
That
what?
session, the whole session is about value?
No.
Okay.
5 questions.
Okay. What are the
We
5
need to
questions?
cover 5 questions during the first step of a STAIR approach.
Okay. What are those
So
5 questions?
these first 5 questions. The first question is, what is the value that we
Okay.
imagine or experience?
Mm-hmm.
So it can be at any point in time. It can be before an AI model is being presented or adopted. It can be now, and you have been using it for like 1.5 years, and now you actually, suggest, how do we speak about how we use AI in our team? So
An analytical tool, as a planning tool, it
yeah,
doesn't have to be fixed at a certain
no,
point.
no. So the first question was, what value is added?
Mhm.
And then the second question is, what role does AI play in your work? So we speak a little bit about how you actually use it or apply it on a day-to-day basis. Is it your ID generator, or is it actually something that does your reasoning? Or so you speak about the various ways of using it, and you do that in a, of course, psychological safe environment, because this is your team leader who's asking you to share how you use AI in your daily work. So number 3 question is, what changes do you see short and long term? And this is where people start actually opening up on both a lot of positive sides, but also some occasions where they could worry a little bit. Usually it's around, well, I don't speak as much to my colleagues as I used to do, or I think we need to talk about how to trust each other's output, or being more aware of how we use AI so we do trust the outputs that we sort of hand over to each other after using ChatGPT for something, right? And then we ask, how will you ensure well-being and efficiency in the team? So we
Human
do
well-being
confront,
and then team efficiency.
yeah,
Hmm.
because that is the sociotechnical output.
Mm-hmm.
And then number 5 is actually, okay, now we have been talking about things that's very, very close to our everyday work practices
Mm-hmm.
and how they are changing. So can we also describe what are the values that are important to us? What are the fundamental values that you think about when you walk into work and you deliver on a daily basis? What are the core values? Is it quality? Is it well-being? Or is it being a good colleague? Or, there are several values that you can sort of then distill from this discussion. And these values then go into actually reformulating or describing what then are the set of principles that we can now talk about out in the open. This is now a shared conversation we have, let's say once a month or every second month, that we talk about these values, because small changes, micro changes to work is happening at the speed of light now with these new tools coming in. So how do we actually put light on it and have a legitimate talk about it?
Forum.
That's
Yeah.
yeah.
So it provides a forum and it also provides a conversation structure, because I found that it is very difficult to have these conversations. Many people's initial reaction is fear, and they can be the most vocal. The ones who actually get along with AI and feel comfortable with it don't have, sometimes may not have much to say. But then you're giving them a structure where it's not just about how to use the AI. It's that in a bigger context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
That's true, and I like the word intuition. We're also building our intuition on AI, right? And both of the examples you mentioned there, they're very fearful about the optimistic. There's problems to be found, you could say, in each of the extremes, right? And what we need is the conversation in the middle, getting these different experiences and perspectives into play. I think there are a lot of subtext here, just as context for your listeners. So what Louise is describing here, again, it was the first step, the first thing you embark on if you take this conversation, if you go into the kind of STAIR methodology and mindset. And the next step would be the ongoing practicing of this structured reflection. So here's I guess there's an understanding here that with AI, the introduction of generative AI and what comes in the future, we can have these kind of your projects. They're framed in a time and place over a set episodic period of time, and then we can move on to the next digitization project. We can't really do that anymore. We need this continuous reflection, this continuous adaptation to the technology. So there's no real sense of saying that this is the only way to look at it, or this is the only way to understand it, or this is the only way to feel about it. What is the only truth is that you need continually to reflect on this technology, because that's what empowers you, right? That's what empowers you to make choices in terms of this technology. So you could design work top down, as Louisa said, but we could also kind of bottom up meet these processes and this work design and try to take a stance on how do we want to use it, what value does it give us, what's important for us, and these drivers are what you actually use to navigate the AI
Yeah.
world.
Particularly, I love this transition from value to values. I think that's beautiful.
Mhm.
And I think that the change is so big and so fast that you cannot have a pre-discussion. I like that it's iterative, it's an iterative pace,
Mhm.
and that you have this reflection on an ongoing basis. People need to have the discussion before, during, and after, and continually. I think that that's been my experience as well, because I can't come in a training course, make people understand how they're going to feel, how things are really going to change when this is put into practice. And I feel that where we're seeing the difference between this is just a new tool to this is really something that's going to reinvent how we work, where all of our processes, it has such pervasive and significant impacts that you need to have these conversations, because you're going to incrementally make changes, and then those are going to have repercussions, and you have to have this constant reflection. I think that's really valuable. Can you walk us through a little bit about an example? So what was a change? How did you apply the methodology, and how did that go? Also interested to hear feedback from any of the participants.
Right.
I would like to give the example from a big hospital that we have been working with.
Fantastic.
That they had an AI model that was being built and trained to take over a bit of how to say pre-surgical information for patients. So imagine you have this ChatGPT, and then you, as a patient, can ask that chatbot, "How should I prepare for the operation next week?"
That's
So,
very useful.
very, very useful. And then we went into the department that was about to start using this, and made interviews in terms of asking nurses and medical secretaries and also the surgeons. How does this impact your everyday work? What would be the value? And then we started all that. What would be the value? What role will it play in the future work processes and so forth? And they started to, instead of thinking about that just the technology, we created a new way of thinking about and speaking about technology in terms of the changes to work roles, decision processes, and also modes of collaboration, because they could see that all of these three elements were changing due to actually the nurses not being, are we certain that the patients have gotten the right information? Just imagine a nurse not trusting an AI model giving a patient the right information about how to prepare before a surgical session, whatever.
Yes. Well, because it's a very useful application, but
Yeah.
then very risky, because if it did go
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah. But also, hospital work is, it's very time,
Mhm.
it's very stressed. There's a
Mhm.
lot of relational coordination between different professions, and it's very tech intensive.
Mhm.
They use a lot of applications and devices, and so So this is actually a very interesting context to study. So after having taken this first step of asking these questions, they started to formulate sociotechnical principles. And we put in the three professional domains together: nurses, doctors, and medical secretaries. And they together found out what is actually the core element that gives you meaning in a work role. So in the hospital, we found out that actually nurses, if you take away some of the patient to nurse relation, you are actually chipping away on some of what is most meaningful for nurses. And during a STAIR session, it dawned to the doctors, wow, if we keep chipping away on that, then we actually is also, how to say, decreasing the element of meaning, well-being, engagement, motivation, the very reason for becoming a nurse. So how do we not do that? Or where do we then create that relation between nurses and patients if we take it away in this particular part of a task? So that was just the value of just doing the first step of STAIR, and then also deriving 6 basic sociotechnical principles that they are now, talking about. How do we
For any of those
adhere?
principles from that example?
When we introduce generative AI, we make sure to maintain emotional communication in our workflows. That was
Mm-hmm.
one thing. And
So the communications that have most emotional importance are the ones that we want to protect.
yes, they should not be replaced by AI. That was one thing. And also training and experimenting, very much like what we saw in Copenhagen municipality. But at the hospital, because of this, high level of relational coordination, real time, when you do something at a hospital, it's in real time, or the relation is taking place real time, not in a linear process. So how do you protect that? That was very important to them.
I think that there's examples. So, for example, a lot of our listeners will be in user experience design or writing or technical writing, and some even maybe doing some product development. And I've talked to coders and writers and things like that, and there's AI can replace your colleague interactions. Instead of having a reason to just go down the hall or pick up the phone or start a chat and ask a colleague, if I
Yeah,
can ask the AI all the time,
yeah,
you know, yes, I'm more efficient as an individual, but I'm also kind of just sitting at my desk all day
mhm, mhm,
talking to a machine.
yeah,
And that can be damaging. And then also, coders or writers, for example, they've spent years learning a particular craft. So I know my punctuation is excellent. I have really excellent spelling or grammar. And a lot of writers are very proud of those skills they developed and worked at for years
mhm,
to get to that level. And then
yeah,
you go, well, yeah, but we just don't need that anymore.
yeah,
And that can be very shocking. Or a software developer. I gave a presentation a while ago, and I was asking software developers, like, if your value is literally in just writing the codes down, you're going to be in trouble.
mhm,
So then, where are the valuable parts of the work? And I think that's like in each what I'm getting from this, and what I'm reflecting on my own project experience is that we have this discussion of what is the thing that is valuable that I still bring to the party, and that. One of our first Truth Collapse episodes, someone said, we'll probably have job security, like we will have a job, but we will not necessarily have job role security in the sense our job
mhm,
descriptions are
yeah,
being rewritten.
yes,
And
yeah,
so that
yeah,
that when you do that, that's not a small thing, especially for
yeah,
a lot of people all at the same time,
yeah,
um, in ways that no one could have predicted up front. So it's not
yeah,
like we're having these discussions where the procurement and hiring departments have these templates and they go, well, I want this kind of person, they do this kind of work, and we're going, well, no, we don't need that kind of person. We need a different kind of person, more specialized with these different skills, and you can't just go on a recruitment site and grab one
no,
because things are changing and we need to be open-minded about how we fit people into those processes. Oh, I had a specific question actually for you, Martin. in the execution of this,
Mm.
what artifacts do you produce? So we talked about the list of principles.
Mhm.
Do you create a list of risks? Do you make notes about how the roles are changing? Do you create acceptance or value criteria or metrics? What do you do? What do you write down after one of these sessions, and how do you kind of store that and come back to it?
So the way we've practiced it is very, very practical, and we also try to keep it at the practical side of it as at a minimum. So we have a STAIR board, as we call it. I said earlier, it's just a Microsoft list, so it could be any program you use for that, where we just to track conversations. Also, it
Okay.
becomes kind of an idea bank. There's this whole iterative circling back loop, this ongoing reflection. So considerations we made, or points we made, or choices we make we may wanna change these further down the line, so we can circle back using this STAIR board, as we call it, looking at what choices did we make, have the circumstances changed. I mean, it could be risks, as you say. So we get risks ascribed to the technological part of it, or compliance issues, or qualitative issues, or ethical issues, and circumstances may change down the line. So we will want to revisit earlier decisions. So that's the most practical part of it, and that's the most concrete artifact, I would say, is the list. I think the more abstract side of it is the ongoing reflection and the intuition that we're building, both as STAIR masters, but certainly as the groups, professional groups participating in these sessions.
And are these forms available? Can if people want to learn about them, or is this public
This is just
open
a tool we
source
use in our, for ourselves when we
okay
we
when you
map
execute?
the conversations, and when we execute. Yeah, we want to keep it as conversational as possible
Okay.
in the sessions themselves.
And so if people are wanting to learn more and try to execute this or reproduce this on their own, is there have you published the methodology somewhere that they can
Yeah,
check
it's
out?
there's a webpage, stairmethod.org, where the
Hmm.
methodology is published. There's a guide, a questionnaire guide with the questions, and there's a set of, you could say, pre-baked principles that you could use just to get familiar with the thinking and the process. So there's kind of a instructive material there you could just take. But if you want to go a step further, as Louise had described earlier, you would want to work on your own set of principles, going through these 5 questions of the first step, which is also available
Okay.
on the website. It's
And
all open
and
source.
and we are actually trying to design a template
Hmm.
to where people can document or fill out what are the AI models they're working on, what are, if you have asked several teams to actually conduct a STAIR session, how do you then, create transparency, but also create some inspirational sharing of what do we do in this team, and what are the values in other teams. So we are working on a template that can be shared. Also, so team leaders or HR or, whoever took the responsibility of rolling out both STAIR but also AI in the organization have a way of following along. Some element of documentation, but also visibility, transparency, and who does what. So, yeah,
Yes, I think from a practical
yeah,
perspective, who does what changes a lot.
yeah,
And then from a social relations and meaning perspective, how teams feel like they are teams.
yeah,
How do we maintain a sense of team? Both of the examples
yeah,
I gave, there's this thing about isolation. And I think
yeah,
if and more and more of us are working from home, we have less interaction anyway. So there's this tension between what technology is enabling us to do and how it's giving us, on the one side, autonomy, but how do we make sure that autonomy doesn't take us into isolation?
yeah, exactly. And that's actually what I wrote a PhD about. So, but that's a whole other conversation, I think.
Wow. Okay. Well, maybe we'll have you back for that one. So, how does it differ, if at all, when applied to smaller, larger initiatives? So, I can see how this works at the team, I can imagine a team of 10 getting in a room and working through
Mhm.
this, or maybe up to 20. But if I have 100 people, or if I'm trying to roll this out across for example, most of my clients are enterprise, so we're often setting global standards, but then there might be hundreds of people or thousands of people who are really being impacted or going to be using this change or solution eventually. So how do you scale this to larger groups and conversations?
I would say that we are still working out how to, there are different levels. There are also
Mm-hmm.
different support functions in organizations, and in particular larger organizations who wants to be a part of this agenda. Right now, we are speaking with the human resource departments, senior human resource decision makers, who wants also to be a part of this, how do we reimagine work, but also how do we reimagine the workforce? And what are the pipeline considerations that we have? So there's a lot of very important decisions to make in large organizations around workforce planning, workplace planning, and also work planning. And here HR can step in. So that's how to say an agenda on that. And the way we're doing it right now is that we are training the HR seniors to take STAIR with them as a tool to train team leaders or other, leaders in organizations who have the values of providing both well-being but also productivity when rolling out new technology. And I'm speaking with really large organizations, and they see a very good fit with STAIR in the HR department. It could be the one who's responsible for people tech. There's a lot of people in large organizations from the HR department who have the responsibility of people tech or people and culture. And there's a lot of, these hybrid work roles where you have human resource competencies, but also digital understanding. So that is where I would put it in large organizations.
So I will give my reaction to that. I've I'm not anti the HR function. I think it's valuable. My intuition my spidey sense is going off on this is that HR is often feels a little behind the curve. So when we're trying to work with the actual stakeholders who are making the changes, I can see HR, for example, or a positive feedback loop where HR is training business stakeholders on the methodology and how to apply it.
Mm-hmm.
But what I'm feeling out with clients is that the job roles are changing so fast and so profoundly. The business is kind of having to do all this on the fly as they're
Yeah.
working, and then
Yeah.
come back to HR and go, okay, this is how we've reinvented the work. And so if HR can train on the methodology, or people, business stakeholders can learn the methodology themselves, and then that eventually does get codified because
Mm-hmm.
organizations do have, for example, salary bands and role
Mm-hmm.
descriptions. And so if they are going to hire, at some point you have to go through a hiring process. So I
Yeah.
understand that this has to get written back to the corporate DNA, but I feel like things are happening right where the work is being done with the teams, and then there is kind of a going back to HR and updating them retrospectively.
Yeah.
Can I
Yeah.
comment on this? No, Oscar,
Please do.
yeah, I think you're onto something, but I think the question is what is, maybe we shouldn't talk about a STAIR like being change management or a supplement for change management. If we define change management as something that has like it's planned and it's scoped and there's an implementation and we want to reach a certain end of this project, a stability we want to reach, and we can move on to the next project. And I realize that within change management, there's also the perspective that change is ongoing. But the way we practice change management is very project oriented. And I wouldn't say STAIR represents that. STAIR represents more like a management of continuous transformation, you could say, right? And I kind of agree with you on HR on that, but I do think that HR has the muscle, or has the position, has the role in the organization to be the agent of this management of continuous transformation. They can,
Yeah.
but you could also add the critique you have on HR, you could also apply to digitization or to IT, because they also work within these project frameworks with an end goal of this imagined stability we will reach when we implement this or that, and this whole game has changed, right? So there's this continuous transformation, and we need agents who can drive this continuous adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think this comes back to a classic tension in organizations between shared functions like
Yeah.
IT and HR,
Mm-hmm.
and then where usually I'm working, which is like with content management or knowledge management or marketing, who are in their area kind of vertically trying to define their own processes. We're running very low on time now. I think it's been a very useful conversation. I think you've probably got some people who are going to be hitting your website to learn more. If I can end on one question, I'd like to ask you both, what do you think the most urgent changes are? Or the most, I don't know if urgent, I don't want to create a time criticality, but what do you think the important changes are that organizations should make in relation to artificial intelligence and their approaches?
Redistribution of power, I think.
I love that.
So, okay. For me, it's the most important thing is actually to acknowledge that technology drives change, but that change involves changing work roles, decision-making processes, and work systems. So acknowledging that and then be very active, practicing work design, job crafting, and have a way of steering that, is really important.
Thank you. I can't agree with that one more, because I feel so much that seeing so many people just want to pour AI over the existing work and assuming nothing's really going to change. The whole machine is just going to go faster when the machine is actually fundamentally changing underneath.
Yeah.
Martin, can I get you to elaborate a little bit on what redistribution of power might means to you?
That I imagine this future organization we're talking about is a much more fluidic organization where governance is much more fluidic, and we each and every one of us has to take on more roles. Like we've departmentalized governance and IT and HR and change, and I think all this is going to merge basically more, and we all have to take on different aspects and parts of this, and this would entail a redistribution of power, because and the participatory aspect of this demands that, right? That you can't top down steer the organization. You need the organization to steer itself from within. But that being said, you still have an organization that moves in a certain direction and makes choices. And I'm very curious for the future, for what the future brings and how organizations will look. But I can't imagine it being with the same hierarchical structures that, all being said, organizations still have today.
Okay, so I like to end on that, because you make me feel like I want to have a whole nother conversation about the future of hierarchies and strategy and leadership and so on. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much for your time, Martin,
Thank you,
Louise.
Thank you for inviting us.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to jump over to Truth Collapse now and talk a little bit about how this, I guess, the probably go deeper into the theoretical, philosophical, and the socio-technical parts of this. I think this has been a good introduction to the methodology and how it can be applied in business. If you want the more social and personal aspects of this is what we talk about over on the Truth Collapse podcast. Thank you both for being willing to do both episodes. And if you're listening, I hope to see you all there. Remember to tell your friends. That's our main form of getting awareness is word of mouth. So we appreciate that. I personally hate saying like and subscribe, but I'm kind of also a victim of the system. Yeah, I'm a victim of the system we're in.
Like and subscribe.
Oh, thank you so much.
We thoroughly recommend.
Yes, share, comment, and tell your friends. Click all the things. So thank you both so much. I appreciate it, and we'll see you again soon.
Bye.
Bye-bye.